Good evening. I think we are live. Can we get a comment check if anyone's alive? We don't need it. I can actually see it. So, good evening, everyone. And if you're joining us, thank you for joining. If you're watching back, thank you for watching. So tonight we're going to go into a deep dive into cryptocurrency as a solution to staying outside the system. And just so we're clear, when I say the system, I don't just mean the monetary system. I mean all of it. So that's financial, political, and to some extent social. So if you've braved the previous live stream, you may remember that the overall objective of these streams is to provide solutions to the multitude of problems that faces. As Cobber Mike put it in the previous stream, we are at war and our government's haters. So a lot of time has been spent analysing the problems, and whilst we still have a lot of that still to do, we need to start discussing solutions to the problem, and we need to solve those problems before they've solved for us and not in a way that we're going to like. So for me, one way that we can really cause some disruption and damage to the system is to starve it of money. And then one tool at our disposal to do this is cryptocurrency. And again, just so we're really clear, whilst we're both on the stream favorable to cryptocurrency, we're also not blind to its faults and its weaknesses, which we're also going to cover tonight. It's extremely important that everyone is aware of any weaknesses, not only so you can make an informed choice, but also to protect yourself and your coins and your investments. So whatever level of awareness of cryptocurrency you have, tonight we're going to take you on a bit of a journey. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll either answer them as we go or we'll get to them at the end. And we're aiming to keep this to about 90 minutes to 2 hours max. So whatever we don't cover, we can follow up on with another stream rather than going after a difficult second album stream length record, which if you haven't already, go over to their channel and subscribe. And while you're there, also look up and subscribe to the Nice Things podcast as well, which is awesome. And then the final order of business is that nothing you're going to hear tonight is financial advice. There is distinct possibility that anything you invest in cryptocurrency can go to zero or straight up stolen. And you're entirely responsible for doing your own research and making your own decisions. So with all that out of the way, and without further ado, Dan, otherwise known as King Bingo on Twitter, do you want to give a quick introduction? And then the scenario to start off with is you're stuck in a lift with a no coiner, and you've got 10 floors selling the idea of Bitcoin. Can you give us your elevator pitch and explain what it is and why they've got to go and drop in everything they're doing and go and buy some?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the stream, first of all. Delighted to be here. I think that talking about this is the perfect way to get into some of the solutions to some of the problems that we have at the moment. A little background on me. I was, for about 20 years, a venture capitalist looking at emerging technology and digital trends. I've subsequently left that, and now I'm sort of focusing on looking at various tech-heavy investments on a personal basis and cryptocurrencies. That's not something I did professionally. I didn't look at cryptocurrencies then, but in the last couple of years, it's something that's really sort of flagged up for me as incredibly important and rewarding. And I'm just spending all my time sort of looking into this and trying to understand the space. To your second question about what's the elevator pitch for it, I think any elevator pitch for Bitcoin, so let's start on that one at least, has to look at the recognition that the existing monetary system that we've got at the moment is in serious peril at this point. So look, to give you some numbers around that, about a third of all the money that has ever existed was created in the last 18 months. They are printing astonishing amounts of money, and hopefully we get into this a little bit in a minute, but we're at the stage in the cycle now where they have to do it. So context around that, the United States of America, they take in around about 9 billion in tax revenue every day. They are printing $84 billion a day. So the amount of money that they're printing is completely out of line with the amount of money that they're taking in taxes. So you can see that something is seriously wrong in there. What's the total number of pounds or the total number of dollars that will ever exist? It is infinite. You know, they can carry on printing. All they've got to do is enter a number into the central bank spreadsheets, push it out to their network, their ledgers, and that money then exists. Contrast that with Bitcoin. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Now, don't worry about that because each of those Bitcoin is divisible down to 100 million places, but it is absolutely scarce. The last Bitcoin will be mined in 2040, and after that, no more will ever be created. So dollars and pounds can be printed and your value can be washed away, but Bitcoin will hold its value, and in fact, it will increase in value over time.
I'm just going to quote yourself now. When you said in the last stream that technology is deflationary, and that just says it perfectly, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about computers, I mean, the price of those, the first computer you bought wasn't particularly powerful, and it was quite expensive. And now they're getting more and more powerful, and they're getting less expensive. But the same goes for anything. Manufacturing techniques are improving. Energy generation should be improving. There's a whole range of things that should be coming right down in cost. The marginal cost of additional production is really getting minimized with some of the innovations at the moment. But you compare that to what's going on with perhaps financial assets, such as if you want to buy a pension or your home, if you want to buy a home, or perhaps if you want to buy your children a home, all of those things are absolutely soaring. So we've got these two effects rubbing up against each other. We've got the deflationary effects of technology, and we've got the massively inflationary effects of everything in the financial system and everything that is denominated from that, such as property, land, stocks and shares that you might need for providing an income in retirement.
I think there was also a graphic or a video that I think it was you actually shared on Twitter that recently, where it showed you those numbers in context. So I think, again, going back to that Lyft scenario and telling someone why they needed to buy Bitcoin, as that whole point about currency failing, that to me was like, it was a standout moment. Surely for anybody who can see something like that and not be just completely petrified at what's about to happen. Because it
was a great graphic. It basically sort of showed you, $100 note you can hold in your hand, and then it went up. What does $1 million look like? And again, you can hold it in your hand. What does $1 billion looks like? And then it's on a pallet, and then it's how much money has been printed within the last 18 months, and it is pallet stacked on pallet for I can't remember how many football pitches, but it was dozens, if not
dozens,
scores.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was a huge amount. And look, just to put the amount of Bitcoin into context, I said there's 21 million Bitcoin, and there will never be any more. Compare that to the number of millionaires in the world today. There are about 52 million millionaires in the world today, but there is only 21 million Bitcoin. So if every millionaire in the world wanted to have a Bitcoin, they could not. There aren't enough of them. So if you own even a relatively small amount of Bitcoin, even if it is a fraction, you are in pretty rarefied air. You're gonna be okay if the financial system collapses and we end up going to something like this instead.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's an important point, right? Because I think one of the things that we need to answer is why? Why do we need to stay outside of the system? So we've kind of said that it's on verge of collapse. It's not when. Sorry, it's not if. It's a when.
Yeah.
So yeah, even just having you might put in like $100 worth, $200 or $1,000 worth now, and you might look at it compared to someone else's holdings and think, oh god, this is nothing. But actually, as you say, the price now it will become irrelevant when you price it in dollars anyway if the dollar collapses. But B, you have a quantity of something which potentially, like you say, even like $1,000 might buy you a few 100,000 Satoshis worth of Bitcoin. If the headline price of one Bitcoin goes up through the roof or whatever, it doesn't really matter, right? You've got 100,000 of something, even though in today's money it might be $1 each or something. But once you get to that place where the dollar is gone, what else do you start valuing it in? You've got really nothing to evaluate it in or against, which is actually the place where you want to be. Because all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, what can I exchange this for? And that's where it starts to become extremely useful, right? Because you can say,
absolutely,
well, I'm not going to exchange it for dollars. I'm going to exchange it for food or for like a tank of petrol or something important. Do you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden it's a conversation as well. How many Satoshis do you want for this? And then boom, you're there pretty much.
Well, and that's always sort of the key flip that goes on with people who start looking at this stuff. So when people first start looking at it, they think, how can I maximize my amount of pounds or dollars, whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
And they think, okay, if I invest in Bitcoin, maybe it will go up and then I'll have more pounds or dollars. And you can always tell when you're speaking to somebody who's very new on this journey, because those are exactly the terms they talk on. Oh, it's gone up today, it's gone down today.
Mm-hmm.
I put in this many pounds, and they're measuring it in pounds.
Yeah.
You can always tell when somebody has been involved in the space a bit longer, because they no longer use pounds or dollars as their benchmark. All their concern is, how many Bitcoin have I got? I don't have enough. How can I get more? And they start to think in those terms, because what they start to recognize is that the pound and the dollar are atrophying their value at such a substantial rate that it almost becomes meaningless at some point. So I mean, I did a thread on Twitter that I got pinned to my profile, and in that I talk about how the system could collapse, and how that is probably going to happen sooner rather than later. and I throw in there a value at the end of what Bitcoin could be worth if it replaced global money as the global reserve. Now that's obviously an absolute knockout win for Bitcoin if it were to become the new global reserve. But at that point, each Bitcoin would be worth around, I think it was about $12 million at that point. But of course, actually, if it were to get to that point, it would probably be significantly higher, not because the purchasing power has gone up, but because the number of dollars would be so excessive at that point, because they can just print and print and print, that you get into sort of hyperinflation territory. And actually, even a Mars bar is going to be costing you, $700. So almost the fiat currency becomes meaningless at a certain point.
No, I totally agree. And as you say, people are measuring it by the dollars. I think they're in for a shock, if they do that, or if they, trade short term, because just exactly as you say, that those numbers become meaningless. But then as that hyperinflation scenario, again, I think we're either there or very close to that as well, because they're trying so hard to hide that number from us. And even today, I saw just some random tweet about house prices gone up 12% in the last year. I'm like, how can something in an alleged pandemic go up 12% in a year? It's like, well, obviously there's a signal in there, which is, your house has increased in value, but the currency has decreased in worth.
And that was interesting because they put that out today, and the ONS put that out, and on the same day, we got the official inflation figure for the last 12 months, which was 2%. So houses have gone up 12%. Inflation is apparently 2%. I mean, it's just a complete pack of lies. Inflation is significantly higher than that. One thing I'm very conscious of, Dan, is you've been in this space a bit longer than me. Can you give us a background on the history of Bitcoin? Because that's probably worth covering for people as well.
Yeah, totally. So I discovered Bitcoin. I consider myself quite late discovering it anyway. So I think it was 2017, and I wasn't actually Bitcoin. That wasn't the first cryptocurrency that actually came my way. I was kind of aware of it, didn't really know about much of what it was, and then someone at work effectively tried to get me involved in a scam. It was a cryptocurrency scam, and it was like there's a certain coin. Yeah, it's not guaranteeing riches, but basically, if this goes the way of Bitcoin, you could invest 100 and you could be a millionaire by next year, right? Which immediately, again, I work in like finance and investments, and thinking I'm getting sold to this in an environment where we work, where we're told if something doesn't make sense, if it's too good to be true, it is. So I kind of looked at it and thought, I got hooked a little bit, and I thought, you know what, I'll put 100 quid in or something. It works. It's not going to harm. And then before I did that, I thought, no, I'm going to do my research. I should live the values, right? And the more I read, I thought, this really doesn't sound right. This sounds like they're being a central bank. They've already mined this, whatever quantity is of what I'm buying, and they're controlling the price, but I've got to give them Bitcoin. And immediately my mind started working. It's like, right, I'm not going to go into this. I need to find out now. I need to go deep into like Bitcoin, what it is. So basically that kind of started my journey. So obviously the first one that a lot of people start with is Bitcoin, because it's the most talked about on the news. It's the most recognized. And then when I started looking at the history, what made me first curious about it is it wasn't actually the first cryptocurrency protocol. It was actually kind of, there was several more before it that they tried to get working, but just didn't. One thing that kind of makes me curious about it is the protocols itself. So I started thinking, well, what is Bitcoin? What are these protocols? And then when you start looking at the kind of design, you get kind of shocked about, actually, it's quite simple in essence what they've done here. The kind of design is actually quite simple. All it really means is the protocol is not owned by either a central authority or a central server. It's a truly decentralized, effectively application or software that every node effectively on this network contributes to the network, contributes to the security. It also takes copies of itself, making it extremely difficult to hack and extremely difficult to kind of steal someone else's Bitcoin, basically. So that first piqued my interest, because I thought, oh, this is something I've not really that been involved in. I've been involved in security, obviously in network security, and then I started going deep into these protocols, and then it was like, okay, well, let's start looking at the people, because, and again, another important thing for me is find out who's behind it, right? Because can you really trust them? Do you really know who they are? And to be honest,
we don't know who's behind this one. I don't know if it helps, but I've got a sort of very basic analogy I use to describe how Bitcoin works.
Go.
This is probably oversimplifying it, but I think it's worth throwing it in there. Is how I often explain it to sort of friends and relatives who are getting into this. So I mean, Bitcoin was established in, I think, 2010, although I think the white paper might have been written slightly before that in 2009, and it was very much a response to the banking crash of 2008. And whoever was behind it, he goes by the name of Satoshi Nakamura. He decided to create this money, and it was genuinely a breakthrough, because what he solved was something called the Byzantine generals problem, which makes sure that no coin is spent twice. Because if I send you a JPEG, and then I ask you to send it back to me, I mean that sounds a bit silly, but I mean, how am I going to know that you're sending me back the same JPEG? How am I going to know you haven't sent it on to somebody else at the same time you sent it to me? And digital currencies can't work like that, because you can't have people spending the same money twice. Well, unless you're in a paper money system and you're a central bank, then you can. So he solved that ability to make sure that you could only spend things once. And the slightly silly analogy that I have for explaining how Bitcoin works is, imagine you're in a pub with a bunch of mates, and Bitcoin is beer tokens, say. And what you're doing is you don't physically have these beer tokens. You've all got a sort of ledger in front of you. So you've all got a sheet of paper in front of you. And I buy you a beer, and somebody else buys somebody else a beer, and so on. And what happens is every 10 minutes, we sort of shout out all the transactions that we've done. And everybody in the pub listens to every transaction that's taken place, and they write it down in their ledger. And that ledger is essentially an analogy of the blockchain. So each of these transactions gets recorded at multiple places, at multiple points around this blockchain, with each new transaction get layered upon the last one. And so you don't have to trust any one particular one of those ledgers, as long as the network as a whole has recorded the information correctly. And that's how you can have a money system which is not crackable, but it's also highly distributed, it's highly decentralized. Because as long as the majority of the people in that network agree on what the process is, and at this point there are so many people involved in the network, that you can have a sort of perfect record of what the ledger of the money is. Now, incidentally, that ledger process that I'm describing, it's actually very much the same with what we consider to be paper money, fiat money, so the dollar and the pound. That's all based on a ledger system as well, that's shared between the banks. But the only difference is here is that we don't have that centralized Federal Reserve or Bank of England at the minute, which is making calls and adding money into that system at any time. I know you're a technical guy, Dan, so is my analogy oversimplifying it, do you think, or is that about right?
No, it's absolutely spot on. And it's actually a great way to think about it, right? Because taking the people in the pub, each one of those people is effectively a node on the network. So the way that the system becomes centralized is everybody who's a node on the network has a copy of whatever is going on in the entire network. So in terms of, you say you can't spend it twice, another key point is because effectively all nodes have to, or at least the majority have to, reach a consensus that what you've just heard about all the transactions that have taken place is correct. And we're not going to allow someone to spend it twice. So no, I think it's a brilliant analogy. It does really cover it, and the kind of decentralized way about it. But I think and as for the protocols itself, because this is where I think some people get lost on the distinction between blockchain technology and Bitcoin itself.
Yeah.
So it's so Bitcoin is effectively the currency of that blockchain. So effectively, the blockchain is a network. The network has a currency, which is blockchain, and effectively, if you provide effort to secure the network, which we'll go on to in a second, you get paid or rewarded in a quantity of that currency. The reason why they did this is because there needs to be an incentive for someone to actually provide that security. Like, you don't want to just take part and then trust that everyone just is happy to take part. What they've actually done is provide an incentive in this protocol that says, right, if you actually contribute by helping us solve a problem, then you get rewarded. And from there, effectively, that ecosystem has created the currency effect almost. It's a technology solution, but then the currency effect has been another kind of outcome. And
I think you're right to make the distinction between blockchain and Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency based on a blockchain, but you can have other cryptocurrencies based on other blockchains. So
Exactly.
For example, Dogecoin, which is not one that I recommend, it's basically a copy of the Bitcoin blockchain, with a number of changes. And actually, the guy who invented that, on his white paper was, if they buy this, they'll buy anything. And it was such a ridiculous joke that it's now the 5th largest, I think, cryptocurrency in existence, which I find staggering, but okay. But yeah, there were multiple blockchains, and there's other innovations, which hopefully we can come on to later, such as NFTs, which are possibly the future of not only finance, but of ownership of almost everything, especially sort of property, yeah, a whole bunch of IP rights, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Bitcoin was the one that perfected it the first time, and is also the one that has the strongest store value argument. Although again, I think that's something we're going to come on to a bit later.
Yeah, totally. And just going back to the people element as well, as you say, we don't really know. We've got a name, right? So,
yeah.
But we don't know if that was a real person. Also, that because it's worth noting that the people behind this are kind of like, I think, was it cypherpunks they call themselves? So they're badged as kind of anti-state, kind of cyber hackers and all that kind of stuff. But you really have to, just like everything, right? You have to question, like, are they really? And another thing, which I know we'll come on to later, which makes me slightly suspicious, is the cryptographic protocols. So the particular one for Bitcoin is ECDSA. I think I'm right in saying that. All protocols, all cryptography has to go through NIST or be approved by NIST, which is a branch of the government, effectively. That immediately gets my suspicions raised on, did it really come out of nowhere? And that's not to say I'm trouncing it at all. But again, I think it's really important when you look at all of these things, you take it all into consideration, include any potential weaknesses and any kind of threats and weaknesses.
Yeah, so I mean, that's something I've got to say I'm less familiar with. I do know that it emerged very much from the sort of the libertarian and crypto type community. So the Bitcoin white paper, and actually, if anyone wants to read the Bitcoin white paper, I think it's only like 8 pages or something.
It is just a few pages, yeah.
And it's sort of dripping with sort of libertarian sentiment, disdain for the sort of the elites and the banks and so on. And it offers a way out of that. But of course, we know so little about whoever it was that created it, although we've all got our theories on who it was. But yeah, I mean, but what that gives it is no way to attack it. So pretty much all of the other cryptocurrencies, there is an office somewhere with a handful of people in it that you can go and tap on the shoulder and say, do this, and they can make it happen. So, for example, the second largest cryptocurrency, Ethereum, there was a hack on that platform, and they reversed the blockchain. They had the ability to do that. Nobody controls Bitcoin, and so even if you wanted to, you could not reverse transactions. Which adds to the point about responsibility, because if you invest in Bitcoin and you take possession of those coins, if you take them off the platform that you buy them on and you take possession of them themselves, there is no department that you can ring up if you send them to the wrong place. So you need to be very careful with it. But at the same time, what that does is it completely removes the state. It completely removes the central bank, and effectively it sort of wipes out the need for the banking sector as a whole. So it radically transforms our relationship with the state and central banks and even the financial system, which is a truly extraordinary shift in power.
Oh, it really is. And I think that again, being of kind of libertarian bent anyway, or it was at the time, that's the thing that really appealed to me. It's like, right, so we can literally remove the state and financial institution from our lives. And I think that someone used the phrase at the time, it's kind of stuck with me, it's like, be your own bank. It's like, that's a really good tagline. And I think if I was selling it to anyone, which I have done, it's like, that's how I do sell it. It's like, well, you get the chance to be your own bank, and it's more than just Bitcoin now. As you said, like, Bitcoin was the first well-established, it's the biggest store of value currently, but then it's just from there, the technology has then evolved, and you can do so much more, with cryptocurrency, which we'll come on to. But that's the way I would sell it. I would say, right, you can be your own bank. You can literally do peer-to-peer transactions with anyone in the world with almost no oversight at all. So it's worth saying that the transactions that go onto the blockchain, it is a network, it is effectively a distributed ledger or database, so people can see the transactions that have taken place, but there's no real way. Well, sorry, there are techniques of tracing people to those transactions, but it's like extremely advanced techniques. There's nothing inherent in its design that says, right, Dan, you've got this address belongs to you, we know that this address belongs to you, and we know what you're going to spend.
You can work it out sometimes,
can.
but yeah, it's they're not sort of labelled as such. It's not like there's a central registry anywhere that has it. But actually, you made a point. You talked about banking people and taking people off the banking system. So when I first looked at Bitcoin, and cryptocurrencies in general, actually, I was thinking, okay, so this is fantastic, because what this will do is it will enable us to bank the unbanked.
Yep.
So in the developing world, there's a huge amount of people that don't have bank accounts. And if you can basically, you can skip the whole financialization process. You can just give them a phone with a digital wallet on it. In fact, this is happening in El Salvador now. A huge percentage of that population don't have no bank account. So, but they've all got mobile phones. Anybody who's travelled around the world know that there is no third world country third world enough that they don't all have a newer phone than I do. So all of these people can have a digital wallet on it, and it enables them to access the financial system. So at first I was thinking, brilliant, okay, so this allows us to bank the unbanked. Then I started looking at it a bit deeper, and I started, coming back to my old gold bugs days when I was sort of realizing the huge flaws of the financial systems and governments as well. And now I realize actually it's something more. What it is the ability to unbank the banked in the first world as well. We can get off the financial system. The financial system is so slow, so top down, very authoritarian. If your bank doesn't want you to buy something, they can basically just stop you from buying it. They don't do it much, but they do it sometimes. And with the way that we're going in the world at the moment, with ever more authoritarian governments, we could see increasing levels of control. You're not allowed to make these purchases. You must do this. Well, they're doing with that tax already. But if you're on a blockchain, it is entirely within our power. There is no force that can make you do a transaction, apart from putting a gun to your head and saying you must do this. But even then, you've got the choice as to whether you actually do it or not.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point in terms of like people understanding that benefit versus what potentially is coming, which is CBDCs. So that's central bank digital currencies. So the fact they've kind of badged it as digital currencies, they're obviously hoping that people hear that and think, oh, just like Bitcoin. But they need to understand that no, it isn't. It really isn't like Bitcoin. It's coming with so many strings attached. This is what people need to be prepared for. So just as you were saying that, like at the moment, banks can arbitrarily stop transactions. So if they think it's fraud, for example, they can stop it. I remember when like Visa cards and MasterCard stopped people buying like Bitcoin with their cards, right? So they can automatically say, well, this vendor is not, you can't spend with this vendor, etc. Or there's certain things you can't do. CBDCs is like taking that to its like furthest natural conclusion, which is actually when let's say the currency dies and then CBDCs just miraculously appear as the solution, they can do so much more with that. And it's not just vendors, it's actually controlling all of your decisions money, because all of the financial institutions actually go away for CBDCs, because effectively that relationship now is central bank produces the money, it washes through the financial system, it ends up in either you spending it or with out of loans and stuff like that.
Well, that was very much the theme of the thread that I put a while back that, like I say, is pinned to my Twitter profile. And it was about how I think that a lot of what's gone on over the last 16 months has been a drive to get us to adopt central bank digital currencies. So it's probably worth quickly outlining my thesis there to sort of explain what I think is going on. Yep. Look, I have no idea what the origins of COVID-19 are. And I have no idea to what extent, if anything, whether it was the initial release or just aspects of the reaction were orchestrated. I simply don't know. But what I do know is that I think that the situation we're in now has almost certainly been hijacked to push a number of agendas that would otherwise not be palatable to the general population.
Yep.
So after 2008, it was very obvious that our financial system was on its last legs. It really was getting to the point where it was going to die. Now you can see this all around you. So over the course of your life, if let's say you had a bank account in the 80s, that bank account would have paid you 8%, maybe even a bit more, just on a regular high street bank account. Now what happens is every time you have a recession, what they do is they lower the interest rates in order to stimulate the demand. Now classical economic theory would say that you don't do that. You just leave interest rates at the natural market level, and everybody who can't meet their payments goes bust, and that capital is then released and it goes into other businesses that can make better use of it. But that's not what we do, and it's certainly not what we've done since definitely the late 80s and probably a bit before that. We lower those interest rates so that it's easier for businesses to survive the recession and come out the other side. But what that means is that every time you go through this cycle, there are more and more businesses that simply can't survive if you were to ever raise the interest rates. And not only that you artificially stimulate the amount of debt in the economy. So again, you can't raise interest rates without wiping out a whole bunch of debt.
Yep.
And as you go through these boom bust cycles, the carrying interest rate always gets lower. And that hit a wall in 2008 because interest rates hit zero. And when you hit zero, at that point, you've basically got two choices. You can have the proper cleansing recession, but debt at that point had reached a level where you would have seen countries fall. I mean, you definitely would have seen the financial system as a whole pretty much wiped out. Governments would have fallen. Pensions would have been unable to be paid. It would have been a true collapse stroke reset, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they decided that rather than allow that to happen, what they were going to do was create more credit into the economy another way, without lowering interest rates because they're already at zero. They were just going to print money. Now, they're not quite at the point where they just simply print the money and then hand it directly to government, because that would look like a banana republic. So what they do is they create the money, they give it to banks, and then they immediately buy it back off the banks. So it is one step away. It's a slight shuffle and a dance away from banana republic stuff, but that's where we are. Mm-hmm. And the government is effectively funding itself through printed money. Now, what does that look like to us? Well, where is that money created? It's created at the central bank level, immediately into the financial sector. So because those guys have access to pretty much unlimited, very cheap money, the size of government grows. The size of the financial sector grows. And because money is being devalued, because of course, if you print money, you're not increasing the number of factories, you're not increasing the number of services or goods in the economy, you're simply increasing the amount of money. So each individual pound or dollar buys you less. But because you're not printing new factories and businesses and so on, what happens is those go up in value because the denominator is getting less. So if you look at something like Microsoft, over this period since 2008, the market cap of Microsoft has gone up 4x, so 400%, while profits have gone up about 25%. There's a complete disconnect between the growth of the underlying value and the growth in the valuation. The easiest way that people can see this is if they ever try and buy a house. Houses go up all the time. Now, people think that's brilliant. They think they're getting rich. They're not, because you still need a house to live in. So you can't access that money. Where it really hurts people, and you get this all the time from older people. They say, they sort of like to make a game of it. They'll be showing you around their mansion, and they say, "How much do you think I bought this for?" And you guess, and it's like they bought it for like £8,000 or something in the late 70s, and now it's worth $750,000, and they think they've done brilliantly well, but they've still got to live in the house. But what's also happened is it's not just property that's gone up; it's financial assets. So they want to buy a whole load of stocks and bonds in order to provide for their retirement. And despite the fact they've been working their whole life and they've been saving up, they're getting absolute peanuts on their pension savings. So it really, really hurts them. And that's where we got to now, where every time you print money, you need to print more the following year or the following month or whatever it is. Because if you ever start to decrease the amount of money, you start getting bank collapse because you cannot pay the interest on the existing stock of debt. I mean, it's quite terrifying, really.
No, I think it is, and I think this is why, again, crypto is really useful, because you're outside of that system, and regardless of what happens. So if something, if this collapse or whatever scale it happens to, right? So if it's a full collapse, or if they just magically produce the CBDC solution and say, right, this is the solution, it's still going to be dog shit. Like, it's still going to be bad.
Well, the CBD fees thing, I think that's the plan element here, because all of the stuff I've just described, anybody in finance understands this. Everybody understands that since 2008 we've been living on borrowed times, and you can absolutely guarantee that the guys that attend Davos, they know this. They knew that this was coming down the line. So if you're looking at a system which is about to collapse, and that system is one in which you are incredibly wealthy and powerful, you're going to be thinking, what comes next? And you're going to be thinking, how can I preserve my wealth and power on the other side of that collapse? So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to initiate a controlled collapse, and you will want to control the way that the system builds back afterwards. From your point of view, you're going to be looking to build back better, with a system with more control on it. And look, I rabbited on. Do you want to tell us, about central bank digital currencies and why they're different and why they're so damn scary?
I think it's purely because, again, is that element of control. But I think you just said the main point there, which is they want the build back better is all about control, and it's making sure you don't rise above your station. They'll decide your station, and they're going to keep you there, and that is the problem. So whilst we don't really have a free society, we have a kind of illusion of a free society. We still have the ability to earn more, make products, own capital, and then buy and trade. Okay, there's taxes and stuff like that, but we generally are free to do that. So there are ways that somebody with small amount of assets can trade the way or earn the way into effectively rising above their station, getting nicer things, having a nicer, better quality of life. CBDCs come inherently with that design that will stop you doing that. So again, the whole COVID thing, it's been absolutely no coincidence that climate change has been now partnered with COVID, because effectively what they're looking for is ways of saying, like all the messages we got through COVID was like, you're doing this for other people. You wear your mask for me, I wear it for you. Same with the vaccines. They're getting you into that mindset that, there's a greater good out there, but you're too stupid to know, you're too stupid to make those decisions yourself. So we're going to control you through this. And
somebody made a great point on Twitter. They said, isn't it coincidental that the solution for COVID and the solution for climate change, they happen to be the same solution, which we need to give all our liberties and money to government?
Right. Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. And I personally don't get how you can't see that. I just don't. I can't understand someone looking at the situation we're in and thinking, no, it's totally by chance, totally by accident. I'm thinking, how can it be? How can the two completely unrelated things have the same objectives and going in the same way?
Well, I think I can answer that actually, and it's fear. If you can make people afraid, they will turn off their rational mind. And obviously the climate thing worked on a large number of people. It made them fearful. And if you're looking at the end of your planet that your children and your grandchildren have to grow up on, at that point you're willing to do basically anything, no matter the cost. I mean, it simply doesn't matter because you're saving the planet. But what I think they found is that only works on basically a minority of people. A lot of people reject it outright, and a lot of people just think, oh, whatever. But the virus was brilliant because, that got a huge swathe of people who never bought into the climate thing.
No, I totally agree. It's conditioned them, and the fact that it was never going to be 3 weeks to flatten the curve. Do you know what I mean? Because they wanted this to become embedded in your psyche, not only the fear but also the control element. Do you know what I mean? It's like, no, we know best. Follow the science. Don't question it. It's like, just do these things, and then you don't know. You can't make the best decisions for yourself. We need to. So that nicely sends them. And I agree that the virus was a genius masterstroke if that's what it was.
Well, let me give you another example. So you mentioned, was it 3 weeks to flatten the curve?
Yeah.
We have been through currency collapses before. The last one was in 1971, where President Nixon finally severed the link between gold and paper money. And when he did that, he said, for 10 days, we're going to sever the ability to cash out your dollars for gold. It's just a temporary measure. We're just going to do it for 10 days. 2 days ago was the 50th anniversary of the start
Jesus.
of those 10 days. So there is nothing as permanent as a temporary government measure.
No, totally, and no, totally agree with you. It is, yeah. But we just continually in this cycle, and said fear is a great driver, as you said. We're just going down that route, and the thing that makes me, or the thing that people really should be aware of these CBDCs is similarly to how Bitcoin is pre-programmed and automatic, and there's no authority you can effectively appeal to if you make a mistake. CBDCs are kind of similar in the fact that they will be programmed. So if you, and personally, I think it's going towards the carbon credits, because for the longest time ever, I thought, why the carbon credit or the carbon economy? It just seemed like a massive scam.
Have we explained to people what CBDCs are? Is that worth quickly running through? So a CBDC is a central bank digital currency.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, a lot of people they start to get comfortable with Bitcoin, and they realize that, and other sort of cryptocurrencies, and they realize that it's significantly faster. You can take more control, and so they start to like the idea of digital currencies.
Mm-hmm.
But those are, especially Bitcoin, it is completely decentralized. You become your own bank. But a central bank digital currency is something else. A central bank digital currency, it preserves the central bank, obviously.
Yep.
And your wallet is stored on the central bank, and you just access it. Now, the reason why that's so worrying is, well, first of all, I mean, there's a number of reasons why it's so worrying. But first of all, the central bank sees every transaction that you do, all of it. So there's no tipping the milkman at Christmas anymore. They see the lot. Now they will sell that as a convenience, because, for example, you won't have to do tax returns anymore because they see everything. They will know exactly how much tax they decide they owe you, and they take it off. Same if you get a speeding ticket, it'll be a lot more convenient. You don't need to send in a check anymore. By the time the cameras finish flashing, they've already deducted the money straight out of your account. But also they can put flags on your wallet to say what you can and can't do. So they can decide that you can only spend £20 a week on red meat, or you can only spend this much a week on petrol, or whatever it is they want to do to make you greener or healthier. They can just impose those limits on you. But the one that's really scary is that they can time limit your money. So they can say, look, you get paid on a Monday morning. The money goes in, and that money will cease to exist at midnight on Sunday if you haven't spent it. So get out there and be a good little consumer. Now, if they do that, now I don't think they're going to do that here on day one, but they'll probably do it in China quite soon, where they're just launching their central bank digital currency. It completely takes away that ability to improve your situation. No one again will be able to change class. The level that you are born at, it will be the level that you die at, because you're not able to save, you're not able to invest, you're not able to move up the ladder. And like I say, I can see that happening in China very soon. And even if central bank digital currency, so the Bitcoin that they're talking about, that Rishi Sunak has been talking about, even if they don't do that on day one, can you necessarily be certain that a government that rules over your children is not going to do that? Because all they need to do is turn on the functionality, and they've got it.
No, totally. And I think that's what people need to be aware of. It's like, it's those conditions. And like I was saying, the environment one is perfect, right? And that's why I was going to tie it into the carbon credits, is because you can have a credit of some sort, whether it's the underlying currency as the CBDCs or whatever they call it. It's going to be, you're going to have a credit of some sort to use. For example, like the petrol one is a perfect one, right? It's like, oh no, you've already driven to work twice a week. You're going to ruin the environment for this. So no, you can't buy any petrol anymore. It is that level of control. And what makes me kind of laugh kind of hysterically sometimes is that if we'd have having this conversation like 18 months ago, we'd be like, well, there's no way anyone's going to accept this. But now it's like, oh, we've already seen what society is willing to accept.
Did you find it really weird? I don't know if you noticed this, but really early on in the pandemic, we started seeing loads of stories about a cashless society. And I was looking at that and thinking, well, hang on, there's supposed to be this deadly pandemic. We're supposed to be, in desperate fear for our lives. Why am I seeing so many stories about cashless society? I mean, who did they just spontaneously come up with this? And look, I don't want to go into the conspiracy angle, because I just don't know. But what I am fairly certain of is however the COVID thing has come to pass, I think very quickly it was recognised for its potential, as an opportunity to significantly change the way we live. Now, that bit is not a conspiracy. And I know that because, I mean, I've got a book on my desk at the moment. It's called The Great Reset. It was written by Klaus Schwab.
Yep.
He's the leader of the World Economic Forum, where all the powerful people, all the powerful business people and government officials, they go every year and they meet up and they discuss things behind closed doors. He is an influential man and he wrote a book and he said exactly this, that they were going to use this pandemic to push through a whole series of agendas to enable them to build a new world that was better. He implies it's better for all of us, but I suspect it's probably better for the people who attend Davos. So undoubtedly, things like a cashless society, whether this was a plan from the start, it's definitely been seized upon, and the current crisis is being used to ram that through. And if we do nothing, if we are not aware, and to be fair, that's why we're doing this stream, because cryptocurrencies are, complicated. Money is complicated. Very few people understand how the money system works. If we are completely passive in the face of this, they will get their central bank digital currency, and then they will be able to control every aspect of our life, what we spend, where we go, and that's not exaggeration. So in China today, with their pre they have electronic money already. They use it through I think it's WeChat is the app they use. So even though they haven't got their central bank digital currency quite yet, they've got a precursor to it. If you criticize the government online, you cannot buy train tickets or plane tickets. I don't know whether that would happen in the UK straight away. It would probably happen in Scotland straight away, to be fair. But it's handing a vast amount of power to them. So it is essential that people understand, what they're proposing is. And even if they're not proposing that level of control, they're proposing something that enables them to have that level of control at any time, simply by turning it on, simply by pushing a software update. And that's why we're so keen on the open source cryptocurrencies, because it gives you an ability to opt out of that.
Exactly. And even I know one of the kind of statements a lot of people make is, what if they make it illegal? So, well, what? Like it's you've still got a choice. It's like, if they make it illegal, then that's fine. They've made it illegal. That doesn't mean you can't use it. It just means you have to be a bit more careful about using it, but you've still got the option to use it. You've still got a quantity of something you can use.
It's a bit like what's that thing people use for downloading movies? BitLord, I think it is. BitLord. So they tried to outlaw BitLord and the torrenting software, but they couldn't do it because it is a distributed network. Person A, B, and C might have a third of the movie on each of their computers. And that's replicated thousands of times across the world. So initially, when this technology was developed, what the film studios tried to do is they tried to go after individual users who were uploading, a fragment of the movie and slap them with huge fines. And they realized that it had no impact whatsoever. It basically just created resentment, because they would have a very draconian legal action against some 14-year-old in his mum's basement. So the film and movie studios have essentially given up on that, and now they're sort of doing a hearts and minds thing, saying, please don't do that. Let us offer you a better, superior service. And the streaming services have really sort of come to their aid in allowing them to do that. Is exactly the same thing with Bitcoin. They cannot ban it. The only way they could ban it is by going door to door, making you turn on every computer in your house and sitting there searching every directory to find out if you've got a Bitcoin node on it. They can't do it. The only way they could stop Bitcoin at this point is shutting down the internet. The only thing they can do is they can make it difficult for you to buy it. So they can make it difficult for that transaction from when you go to, from your bank account to go to one of the exchanges. That they can do, and they've done it in China. But look at what happened to China. So a couple of weeks ago, China got to the point where their central bank digital currency was pretty much ready to go. So they said, okay, we no longer need Bitcoin, and they tried to ban it. If you look at the Bitcoin wallets that originate in China, huge buying, because the rich people can see what's coming down the line. They can see that they're going to lose their liberty. And even though it's now banned, those wallets are loading up because it's a life raft. It's a way out of the system.
No, I totally agree. And I think that's, again, an important point that people need to grasp. It's like, similar to what we said at the beginning, like even though in terms of the price it fluctuates wildly, and that's usually what put people off, but it's getting you out of that system. It gives you another choice. You can preserve something, some level of value you can preserve by buying Bitcoin or in other currencies. And if they do, and even if they do like stop the bank transactions like Coinbase or any on ramp, that's typically used, all you've really done is knocked it back to where it was, because the Coinbase hasn't existed forever. It used to be just like, again, a peer-to-peer exchange for value. So all they're going to be doing is, even if they do it extremely harshly and do that, it's still going to succeed anyway, because there'll still be a need for people to do that or to do the exchanges. So it'll always have a value. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you hit upon something there about the fluctuation in values. We might want to talk about some of the theory behind why the price has fluctuated as much as it can, and maybe it's worth going back to one of the basic and fundamental points. Do you want to explain how mining works? Because that will probably lead on to it quite nicely.
Yeah, of course. So basically, when you hear the term mining, so I mentioned it earlier on about people providing security to the network. That is done by effectively mining. So what mining is, there's a process or a part of the protocol that basically says every 10 minutes, or there's a parameter within Bitcoin that says every 10 minutes or every certain amount of time, we're going to figure out what transactions have happened on the network. We're then going to effectively issue a problem to be solved by all of the nodes. They're going to compete to solve this problem, and whoever solves the problem gets to write the block and then gets on the network and then gets the reward. So actually what it's doing is the mining process is the solving of that problem, and that's where all the kind of cryptography comes into it. It's dynamic. So what happens is if more transactions appear, or if the more users try and mine and solve the problem, the problem gets harder to solve. So, and this is really important because this is where a lot of the kind of energy consumption controversy comes into it, because basically what people started figuring out was that, okay, well, we can mine Bitcoin and we can earn Bitcoin. And as the price started to go up, because people started to understand it and actually realize that, hang on, just by giving some of my computer power to this mining process, I can actually get a reward that's then worth real money. It obviously drew people into it, and the more people that came into it, the network difficulty effectively became harder, which basically meant that more and more power had to be committed to the network to make it secure. And that is basically it's followed similar to Moore's law. It's just got more complicated, and it's just snowballed from there. So that is what the mining process is. So when you hear the term now miners, it's because what has happened is it's evolved into an industry in its own right. So now, from the person in his bedroom just using his CPU or just his computer power to kind of offer a bit of work into the network to try and get some reward, it's now full scale. People have built factories next to like hydroelectric plants and stuff like. Yeah, it's nuts. But what I love about it is, because the more energy requires to effectively release a reward, the cost of that has obviously gone up because their energy consumption has gone up. So people have found more and more ingenious ways of using energy more efficiently, or purchasing energy more efficiently. They've actually naturally gone towards more renewable sources anyway, like hydroelectric, like I think there's a factory.
So just on the mining rewards, I share. If ever I'm doing a bit of daydreaming, it's the fantasy of going back to 2010 with a laptop, plugging it in and becoming a miner. Back in the early days, because in the early days with a normal laptop, you could be mining Bitcoin on a laptop, and you could be getting the block reward back then was 50 Bitcoin every time you solved one of these 10-minute challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen screenshots from people from the early days who did that. They just left their computer on all day mining Bitcoin because they thought it might be a bit of fun. And you can see the transaction history, and it's 50 Bitcoin awarded, 50 Bitcoin awarded, 50 Bitcoin awarded, and they had this all day. But it's worth noting, back to the sort of fluctuation prices. What is it? Every 18 months, something like that. The reward drops in half.
Halves, yep, halving.
Yeah. Oh no, it's every 4 years, isn't it? Every 4 years the reward drops. So it went from 50 down to 25, and I think we're at 6.25 at the moment.
Yep.
And what that sort of basically does is, over the years, that triggers a supply shock. So the supply was reasonably consistent for all those years, and then you have the 1 year in 4 where suddenly the supply of new Bitcoin just drops, and what that tends to trigger is a bit of a boom. And the price gets then bid up a bit irrationally. And then after we get used to this new supply, the price starts to drop off again. And that's why you've had these sort of 3 big booms previously. And that's a lot of what goes to make Bitcoin quite as volatile as it has been. Because, when I first properly paid attention to Bitcoin, I think roughly about the same time as you, was 2017, when I think the price went up to about $20,000.
That's right. Yep.
It subsequently crashed back down to, I think, a low of about 3,000.
Yep.
And now it's just had one of those halvings again, where it went down to 6.25 Bitcoin for every mining reward, and it's sort of going on one of those upswings again. What I would say is everybody is now expecting it to pull back at some point. It's probably got a lot further to go on the upside right now. Everyone's expecting it will then have a sort of a crypto winter, we call it. But what I'm thinking is, because so many people are expecting that, it never works out the way people are expecting.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think that crypto winter is an important one, because when the last kind of bull run that we've had over the last few months that kind of came to an end, it didn't really come to an end the way I was expecting it to. So again, similar to you, in 2017, I was a keen investor, and that was in all manner of projects. And then the whole thing just collapsed. So that's what you expect. If you, again, from that expectation, you expect the price to come pretty much down to where it started when you first got into it. So I was expecting the same thing to happen. So I think it was about mid-April, when it actually started to come down again. I thought, no, I'm out this time. I've made some money. I'm happy with it. I'm out. And I expected it to go right back down, I see, the crypto winter territory again. I thought, and then I'm going to do something smart, which I didn't do last time, which is, incrementally buy whilst it's on the floor and just hide it away and just forget about it. But it hasn't done that yet, has it? It's just kind of, the price has just stayed reasonably high compared to where it started.
So I think we are in a genuinely different phase at the moment. So it went up to, I think, a peak of about $64,000. Then it came down to I think a low of about $29,000, and now it's on the way back up again. It's probably something like 45 at the moment. But what's different this time is the institutional buyers are getting in, and the family offices are getting in, and the insurance funds are putting some of their balance sheet into it. The hedge funds are putting some of their money into it. So what's different this time is the institutions have worked out the same thing that we were talking about earlier, that the currency, the pound and the dollar, and basically all paper currencies, they're all under severe threat. And so you need to invest in something that is outside the system. Now, and then the only 2 options you've really got, so 3 options, I suppose, would be land. It would be precious metals, such as gold and silver, but only if you hold physical gold and silver, not if you own some collateralized version, some future-based version on the financial market. And Bitcoin. Now, the reason why all of those are important is because basically everything else, it has counterparty risk. So a bank deposit is counterparty risk between even the vanilla retail ones. It's counterparty risk between you and your bank. If it's any other sort of financial institution, financial instrument, it's counterparty risk between a minimum of 2 players in the financial sector, but probably an absolute myriad of the way things are split up. And if any one of those institutions were to suffer, so this was the big thing in 2008. There was a lot of talk about sovereign debt crisis, and the fear that a bank in Greece could collapse. Now you might think, well, Greece is a tiny economy. What do you care if some tin pot bank in Greece goes belly up? I mean, what does that matter? Well, it's because they would then take down the other side of a huge number of financial instruments. Well, not a huge number, but a large number of financial instruments with other Greek banks and French banks and German banks. At least one of those would fall over. And then you'd have the same thing again. The other half of a whole series of financial transactions would be wiped out. And it would just domino all the way up to, the big central banks. I mean, you would have, so the big thing was Greece had a lot of debt held by French banks. French banks had a lot of debt held by German banks. German banks had debt held by everybody else. So even a minnow falling over at that point could domino across the entire system. So what you need is something that cannot, no matter how many dominoes fall over, you're going to be fine. And that is land, precious metals, and it's Bitcoin. Nobody owns the other half of that.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think this is why, again, this is one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast, is because I know it does come into a lot of criticism, Bitcoin, and Julie's so right. We need, like I said, we need to be thorough. But when you boil down to it, that's pretty much what it comes down to. So it's like, what do you trust more? Like, if you've got savings in a bank and something happens, what are the chances of you getting that out versus having some in Bitcoin? okay, there are attack vectors in Bitcoin. Yes, if you haven't got access to internet, it makes it difficult. Yes, we know all this, but still, even when you weigh up all the potential negatives, they still outweigh effectively having a deposit in a bank. And again, it's worth people remembering that when you give money to your bank, it's not your money anymore.
Yep.
You've effectively signed it over to the bank to do literally whatever they want with it, and it becomes not your deposit. You can go and ask for your money back, but that's not actually what's happening. You're calling in effectively a loan, and there's a lot of technical jargon behind it, but people need to be clear of this, and also that's the kind of the protections that you have as well, or the protections that you're given, such as the FSCS compensation scheme and client money regulations and stuff like that. As you said before, these are all layering techniques that banks use to give you that comfort of protection, but actually it's not there because
exactly when you put your money in the bank, it goes straight onto that bank's balance sheet.
Yeah.
And in return, they give you an IOU. Now, hopefully, of course, and we're conditioned to accept this because it's been a long time since we've had a bank collapse in the West, that you can always cash in that IOU. But if you got to a sort of 2008 situation, and I was working in finance at the time, and one of the things I heard after the event, I think I would have panicked a bit more at the time if I'd known this, but one of the big French banks, they were having hourly meetings of the board of that bank to decide whether they're going to turn their network off. So the ATMs would have gone off, and anybody trying to any of the financial instruments that they offered, they would freeze trading on it. If that had happened, it could have caused a ripple effect. And so don't think that if you've got money in the bank, it's safe. If anything happens to your bank, you will lose it. Now, there's one other point I want to make on this. The financial regulator, the FCA, they call themselves now. They released a paper. Also, it might have been Bank of England actually. They released a paper a few days ago talking about bail-ins.
It's the Bank of England, yep.
Bank of England, yep. So in 2008, what we had was bailouts. Now, a bailout is when the state puts money into the banks, provides some additional money. A bail-in is when they take your money. Now, we do have examples of this. So I think it was it Malta in 2008 or Cyprus possibly?
I think it was Cyprus.
Yeah, Cyprus. What they did is they said, okay, we will not touch the first whatever it was, 60,000 euros. I'm making that number up. Anything above that, we're just taking it. When we have the next financial crisis, that could happen. And the Bank of England has just published a paper saying how the process that they would go through to do it. They're talking about this. They're getting ready for a hell of a collapse, and they're making sure that they're covered so that they can just boom 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 implement all this stuff over a weekend if they need to.
Totally. And I think again, people need to realize how these things work. As you say, that they haven't just been sitting around and think, "Do you know, it'd be a good idea if we had the ability to do bail-ins." They don't just think of this stuff up. They would have done that because as you said, they know what's coming, and they want that power at their disposal, so you will never even have to blink. You know what I mean? It's like, nope, done. Without even knowing, you just log onto your account, boom, it's gone. It's like, oh, thanks for your contribution, and then that's it. It's gone. But again, you can't do that with cryptocurrency. So again, when you forget about the price fluctuation, when you have a quantity of something where a government can't do that, you're immediately at an advantage. And as you say, Bitcoin's one of them, gold and silver is another, land is the other. I say those are your ways out effectively, or at least. And it doesn't necessarily to get rich. It's survival really at the end. You know what I mean? If this happens, we're going to be in such a precarious situation. You're literally talking about, your day-to-day living really.
Yeah. I mean, well, so I mean, this reminds me of a question that came in on Twitter that I saw a bit earlier, and I can't find it now. But it was basically somebody saying, Bitcoin is reliant on the internet and energy and so on. And therefore that's a risk. And look, honestly, yes. If the internet goes down, if the power grid goes down, Bitcoin is not going to do you any good.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I like to look at it is, if you are buying gold and Bitcoin, you're an optimist. If you're a pessimist, you would be stockpiling ammunition and tin food.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't get ammunition because I'm in the UK. But, I've got a bit of tin food and probably building up the reserves a bit. But yep. I am fairly optimistic. I'm not insanely optimistic. I don't think that the financial system that we have is going to make a miraculous comeback. Nobody in the financial sector is is thinking that. And look, if all it would take is one hedge fund to say, okay, no, actually the system is sound, and they could start buying up government bonds. And if the system was sound, they would make an absolute killing by doing that. But nobody is on that side of the trade, because everybody realizes that it is a sort of an almost mathematical certainty at this point that the amount of debt that is accumulated in the system cannot be paid. And to put that into perspective, so I think the US, and these are very rough figures, it has about 4 trillion of sort of underlying money, base money, 4 trillion. It has something like 60 trillion of credit. So if they wanted to pay off that credit, they couldn't do it. They could make a dent on it, and that's it. You know, the debt cannot be paid off. The system can only go in credit, because if it doesn't, it won't generate enough new money to pay off the interest on the existing stock of debt. You know, the existing system is going to collapse. So you need something that, and the governments are not going to go quietly. They are not going to say, you know, we've had a good run, but we messed it up and we got greedy and we spent beyond our means for decades. They're not going to do any of that. What they're going to do is a mad grab of anything they can get their hands on. So bank bail-ins. They may even start taking land off people, because that's actually relatively easy for them to do. They can take land off you. They can take property off you. If they really wanted to, they could come and take your precious metal, and that has actually happened before. In the US, they did go door to door at one point trying to get gold off people.
Yep.
But with Bitcoin, you know, I've got a series of words, a passcode in my head, and that's it. You know, good luck trying to get that off me.
No, exactly. And as you say, even if the internet goes down or something serious happens in your local area, which stops you like interacting at that time, if and when it does come back up, as you say, those words, that's all you've got to remember. And then you've immediately got access back to what was there previously.
Somebody's making the point in chat that a popular figure, Willy Woo, in Bitcoin circles, is saying that the halvings will be less important, and I think that's true as well. The reason why I think it was so volatile before is because it was a very small market cap, and even if you've seen small stocks, they move on a very volatile basis, whereas the larger the market cap of something becomes, the less volatile it becomes. There's more money in it. Now Bitcoin, its market cap is now at the point, whereas if it was a stock, it would be in the S&P 500. It would probably be one of the larger ones as well, and so that weight behind it does reduce the volatility. And the idea that the super cycle that the commenter is talking about there is about that, rather than this sort of extreme spike and then prolonged crypto winters that we've had before. And to be fair, we're only talking about 3 data points. We've only had 3 booms before, so it's not, it's only been around for 10 years, so it's not a huge number of data points. Is that it sort of the super cycle can either be an extended bull run or just a very mild crypto winter. And that I think is getting increasing acceptance amongst the people that are looking at it, because of the institutional buying that we're getting now, and the network effect of the amount of people looking at it, is that the volatility will probably be significantly lower. Now, that'd be great. I mean, personally, I would prefer the volatility, because I'd like to pick up more at a lower price. But actually, I think there really could be something behind that.
No, and as you say, on the institutional money as well, because again, if anyone spends any time on effectively Bitcoin or crypto Twitter, they always make a big deal about institutional money, and I think people sometimes get confused about what that actually means. Because I think they think, well, the banks, as soon as the banks start using Bitcoin, we're in. That's us. But I'm thinking you're kind of missing the point of, we're doing banks out of business here. Then if they get involved, or if they start trading or investing in Bitcoin, it's not for the benefit of everyone else. And so what the institutional money you're really interested in are the corporates who currently use banks. So as you say, like the pension funds, all the kind of the big companies, the hedge funds and stuff like that, when they start doing something direct with Bitcoin without going through the banking institution or the finance institution, then that is the institutional money you want, because you effectively want to stop people using institutions and just going straight onto the network effectively.
And I hear that those guys are already here. So I'm no longer in the financial sector. I'm just trading my own book at this point. But I'm a subscriber to something called Real Vision, which is basically it's a bit like a YouTube, but for financial people. And the guys who run that, one of them was a guy who ran a hedge fund at Goldman Sachs, and he's very plugged in. He knows all the big players, and he says regularly on the streams that he does is that he is constantly having conversations with the big institutions. They're all looking at this, they're all interested. Now, it is a bit more complicated for the institutions. It's perversely, it's a lot easier for us individuals to buy because, if as mentioned, I can set up a Bitcoin wallet. I can memorize a passphrase, or if I'm being a bit naughty, I can write it down and leave it in a drawer. And then I can access my Bitcoin at any time, going in through that way. But that's actually a hell of a lot harder for an institution because are you going to trust one guy with a password to potentially billions of dollars that he could at any time go to his home computer, plug that in and transfer it to his own wallet? So it actually poses huge logistical challenges for the big institutions to secure it, although they are solving that, and there are techniques that they can use to secure it. But it's an evolution in thinking that they need to get their head around. And before now, it's never really been worth doing them because the market cap of Bitcoin was too low. But now, like I say, Bitcoin is at the level where if it was a company, it would be in the S&P 500. And it is both worth it in terms of scale, and it's worth it as a zero counterparty hedge to the financial system. That, according to the people who are very well connected, so many of the family offices, the sovereign wealth funds, the big insurers, the hedge funds, they are all either already buying or they're working out how they can buy.
Yeah, and that's actually a nice segue to the next kind of topic, which is the evolution of, from cryptocurrency, from effectively currency to things like smart contracts, because this is one potential way that we can solve these problems. But before I do that, I'm just going to hop on something you said there, which was the institutional money get involved in liquidity and things like that. Another kind of common misconception is that when these institutions bring the money, the price is just going to spike and go through the roof. It's like, well, again, you're misunderstanding. Institutions are not going to want to pay top dollar. They're not going to want to raise the price or skyrocket it for everyone else. They want the best deals. And it can be achieved very simply just by block trading, just like they do on current markets. If they've got a big trade to execute, they'll do it on an off exchange and between a private deal, and that's all that will happen. Yep. So it's just pointing out that, again, when you hear these people say, "Oh, institutional money's coming, prices to the moon," he's like, "No, it's not going to happen like that."
Well, it will indirectly, and indirectly because there is only so many Bitcoin around, and there are only so many available to be sold. So if you look at blockchain analysis, which is basically looking at all the people who hold Bitcoin, you will find a very significant proportion of people, especially the smaller people, is they take their Bitcoin, they store it in a wallet, and then it never moves. Occasionally they add Bitcoin, but they don't spend them, they just hold them. And more of the free float is getting locked away in that. And what we're witnessing is there are a couple of million coins left on the exchanges, and that amount is constantly ticking down and down and down. Now, yes, more coins are being mined by the Bitcoin miners, but actually a lot of the time they're now holding them for themselves. And so that free float of available Bitcoin is just getting lower and lower and lower. And whenever an institution buys and stores it for themselves, that's contributing to that. And what will happen is eventually you'll get to the point where there are so few Bitcoin available that if you want one, you're going to have to tempt somebody to open up their cold storage stash. And the only way you can tempt them to do that is by pushing the price up. So what you could see is quite a significant move at some point.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. And I'm talking in terms of, like, you wouldn't find them go down to an exchange, for example, and say, "No, I'm going to buy like 1 million Bitcoin." Bang, there goes the price.
Well, they might go to they might have a conversation with a Coinbase or somebody like that and say, we want to buy, but they won't be loading up the browser and doing it through that. They'll be having a conversation with somebody and saying, "Look, this is what we want to achieve, and we're prepared to pay you a fee in order to make it do it." But they'll probably be doing it in a series of tiny transactions. At a preset price, and they have all the analytics to know exactly the maximum amount that they can take off without causing a spike in the price, because they don't want to do that.
No, totally. So now let's focus on the evolution, right? So we've covered effectively where Bitcoin came from, the kind of the protocols behind it, some basics on the kind of mining side. So it's worth noting that is, let's call that version 1, effectively of cryptocurrency. It is the most well known, but effectively the problem, or the problem that it solved, was the peer-to-peer, low cost, potentially fast kind of transactions. That was the original use case for Bitcoin in the first case. But then they kind of realized that as this kind of, as the price certainly increased, and as the kind of more people adopted it, there started to become a greater need for more difficult problems to be solved, which can't be done by Bitcoin alone. So,
well, I don't think Bitcoin is even trying to. So what
no.
Bitcoin is trying to be is a store of value,
Mhm.
and it does that job better than anything else I've ever seen, including gold. It is superior even to gold in terms of being a store of value, because it is that absolute fixed supply. But it doesn't attempt to do anything else. And so Bitcoin by itself is not going to replace the existing financial system.
Yeah.
And what you're sort of, I think you're alluding to, is that it didn't take long for people to look at this blockchain technology and think, actually we can do some other stuff with this.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the evolution that it went, like what we'll call generation 2 or version 2, if you want, of kind of technologies. So Ethereum is the most obvious one. Again, it's probably most well known as well to everybody. So in terms of how you would compare the two, or how you would describe the two, is that I say Bitcoin, the use case there is a currency. Ethereum is more like a distributed computer. So actually, rather than just having a single use case, the computer allows people to interact with it in certain ways, and effectively, like, say, they're called smart contracts. But just going back to what Dan was saying there about the potential problem where one person in an institution has access to the wallet, what you really want is some kind of system where actually we don't want any funds to be released from this wallet unless 1 or 2 people or 3 people have effectively signed that transaction and have approved it. That kind of takes away, some of that risk. You can't do that on Bitcoin, but you can do that kind of thing on Ethereum through what is known as smart contracts. And all a smart contract is, it's just a piece of code that says I'm not going to execute until certain conditions are met, and that's literally it. So even though that sounds really simple, actually what that did to the effect of the crypto economy was just almost revolutionize it overnight, because people thinking, oh, hang on a minute. So instead of just trading peer to peer, I can start introducing more and more complex logic into this code, and then we can start doing all manner of kind of financial rules in terms of what we can do. Again, releasing coins at a predetermined point in time or to predetermined people was one of them, and then it just went, like, effectively snowballed from there. So Ethereum was the kind of first, and it's worth noting that one of the big criticisms of Ethereum is currently as well, because as more people have gone to use it, its performance effectively has been pretty poor. The transfer or transaction times have slowed down. The actual cost, so again, similar to Bitcoin, if you want to do a transaction on the network, it's going to cost you something for the miners
to use. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was first witness to this in like 2017 when I first started looking at Ethereum. I think it was only something like $40 or something at the time, and it cost me like 5 or 6 cents to actually do a transaction. I thought, oh, this is brilliant. This is the realization of the goal. And then as soon as it just skyrocketed and everybody was buying it, you couldn't get a transaction done within a couple of hours.
Ethereum is different from Bitcoin. Is that so? Bitcoin does have some development on it, but it's broadly fixed. Whereas Ethereum, it is and all of the sort of generation 2 and generation 3 cryptocurrencies, they're more like a tech company. So the way I often explain it to people is, Bitcoin is like buying the internet back in the late 90s. It is the underlying protocol that makes everything else work. It provides that store of value that provides everything else. So I know that the internet itself was not something you could invest in. It was just a protocol that existed. But imagine you could have bought into the internet itself in the late 90s. You would have wanted to do that. Whereas everything else, Ethereum and all the other things that we're about to talk about, they're like the companies that built on top of them. They're like the Facebooks and the Googles and so on. And actually, I just wanted to pick up on your point about the smart contract. So I often explain it to people like this. I break it right down to a sort of practical example of something you could use. So, we all would have had the experience where we move into a new house or a new rented flat or something like that. And then you've got to try and get the electricity working and get it all in your name, your utilities all in your name, and you have to start making phone calls and doing this and sending off documents and making payments and all that kind of stuff. In the future, what you'll probably find is you'll move into a new house or flat or whatever you're renting or bought, and there'll be a QR code on the electricity meter, and you simply scan it and send money to it, and that's it. You have now taken, by putting money into it, you've turned on the utilities and you've turned on your effective ownership of that. So what it basically does is it removes a whole admin layer that normally takes days at the moment, and half an hour, half an hour if you're lucky, on the phone trying to reach people, because it's all done through that, and it can take over everything. It can take over. And another very simple example is phone contracts. Again, that can be all put onto a smart contract, and it can scale right up to the most complicated financial transactions, purchases of a whole series of different things. All that admin process, and all the physical signing of documents and sending them in and getting somebody to look at them and agree them, all that, that can just be pre-programmed in advance into a contract. And if you accept that contract, it happens instantly. So you're taking days and days and a huge amount of energy out of the process of getting contracts up and running.
Yeah, totally. And I think in terms of disruption as well. So when you look at Bitcoin and the version 1 cryptocurrencies, they were disrupting obviously the financial markets. But as you say, with the kind of Ethereum and the kind of the technologies and the companies built on them, they started the target was everyone else, right? Or it was like
so I phrase it slightly differently. I think Bitcoin is disrupting gold. I think Bitcoin is digital
right.
gold. It is that ultimate underlying store of value, and potentially it could disrupt sovereign debt, which is the basis of our paper money system at the moment. It could replace both of those things, but I don't think it's by itself going to take over the financial system and replace everything that the financial system currently does. So all the lending, and the loans and the contracts and the transfer of value. But the second generation stuff, so the stuff you're talking about now, like Ethereum and the other ones that have come along as well, they potentially could do that.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, again, for everyone kind of listening, that the term decentralized finance is one you're going to come across almost everywhere, because or shortened to DeFi, right? So if it's DeFi, it means decentralized finance, and it means just that. Again, it's when taking the centralization out of all of those contracts, all of those interactions. So the way easily to kind of conceptualize this is imagine everything you do in life that involves an institution. If you're paying money, if you're taking out a loan, if you're buying insurance, if you just just sit and think how many institutions you're involved with. You've got the credit reference agencies, you've got the institution itself, you've got people who loans who subfinance the finance, refinance, etc. All that is done through institutions. All of that effectively goes away and then lands in your hands effectively, or at least taken care of by a smart contract. That's how important effectively I see it as it is, because you're effectively saying that all of those layers of financial institutions that have built up in this current system could effectively just disappear if we got this right, or if as the usage kind of increases.
So it's hard to understate the sheer impact of something like this. So in the UK, a huge number of people, I think something like 12 million people. No, it can't be that many. It's a number of million of people work in the financial sector, which is absurd, really, because people should be working in things that actually produce something, actually produces a good or service. Whereas it was in our country, the financial sector itself has become, I think it's 1.2 million is the number of people that work in financial services, and they're just pushing money around. And that's because that financial sector has grown out of all control. Because of the nature of the way that money is created. It's created in the financial sector, so people gravitate to it. If decentralized finance comes along, it will basically strip away almost all of it. All of the banks today will be washed away. Now that might seem a bold claim to make at the moment, but just think back to the early days of the internet. What did Amazon sweep away? What did lastminute.com sweep away? I mean, itself ultimately, but what happened? The Yellow Pages, Google completely swept it away. Now, if you were stood there in front of a Yellow Pages executive in 1997 saying, look, an internet-based company is going to come along in just a few years, actually, and completely remove the need for your business, make you completely obsolete, he probably would have laughed at you.
Mhm.
And the same thing today when you have these conversations with financial services people, they can't envisage a world in which banks and insurance firms and all the rest of it no longer exist. But I think we genuinely could be at that point where everything is about to be swept away, and that is why I came out of the financial sector a couple of years ago, and I'm in no rush to go back into it, because I think that basically, most of it is going to become obsolete very quickly. And that's why I want to focus on what I'm doing at the moment, which is looking at crypto. I mean, give you a number here. The internet, when it was on its adoption phase, was growing at 63% a year. Cryptocurrencies are growing at 119% a year. So cryptocurrencies are growing twice as fast as the internet itself. And the change that this is going to have on our economy and the financial sector and government is going to be truly enormous. I mean, and people in the financial sector who understand this, and I think increasingly a lot of them do, especially the central bankers, they are terrified of the change that is coming. They are really concerned about what could be about to happen to them.
No, I would totally agree with that, and I think again, this is why this stream is important to make people understand about this. We do have a way to get out of the system, and I think this is why, as a comment I made on the last stream as well, is like one of the big weaknesses of the current system is that, well, not weaknesses, I suppose. One of the big things they consume is money. If we take even a slice or a big chunk of that money out of their system, it's going to hurt them. Do you know what I mean? And it could trigger all manner of things. But as you say, that the scare thing for the government and the financial services is that we become self-reliant. We actually don't need institutions to take care of the money, because we've got there's contracts or systems and devices out there that can do it completely autonomously and securely, and actually at a lot cheaper and a lot quicker. So I agree with it. I think it's the headshot to the entire system, which is why I think is important. The one thing I think that people do struggle with, not necessarily the technology, because if you think about it, you don't, even though we've covered the technology and how it works, you don't necessarily need to understand it fully. Just like people don't understand the financial system currently, all you need is effectively some simple bullet points and an on-ramp to make it easy for people to say, by the way, do you want to do this? Great, here's how you do it. And for me personally, I think that's still where we've got a lot of ground to cover.
I'm less concerned about that. So I mean, again, using my analogy of going back to the late 90s and using the internet in the late 90s was really hard. I mean, you had to have this dial-up modem. I mean, just connecting the kit was hard work. Knowing what to do with it, and connecting to the right sort of portal, AOL or whatever else you were going to connect to. I mean, most of the other stuff you wanted to connect, you had to do far more directly. There was no way that your mum was going to be doing that, for example. Whereas, fast forward 20 years, now my mum uses the internet every single day, because it is so incredibly easy. It's on a phone, and a lot of people have done the thinking about how can we simplify this to the point that anybody can pick it up. I mean, most people's grandparents, they're using the internet on a daily basis at this point, because it has been simplified. I think we're in the same thing with cryptocurrencies. At the moment, it is a smaller number of people who, well, at this point, it's not actually that difficult. It's a lot easier than it was, but it's still a bit clunky. But I'm confident in 10 years, even people in their 70s will be routinely using this, because the interface would have been made so simple at that point that it will be just as simple as going on Twitter and sending a tweet at that point.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that it's definitely coming, and I mean, the progress has been made. Even from, like, say, when I first got involved in it in 2017, what actually appealed to me, not necessarily from a technology point of view, but from an investment point of view, certain kind of like obscure coins, or shit coins as they're most lovingly known as, were really hard to get hold of, which actually is a good thing if you want to do it for an investment, because if you can get hold of something early and it's really difficult, it means it puts you in a very small number of people. And then the easier that becomes to effectively get hold of, either because it's gone onto an exchange where more people can actually access it, and then the price goes up, you then can profit from it. So I think that in itself is a driver. So no, I totally agree. I think the simplicity is definitely getting there. And then
those are waters that I don't swim in myself. I recognise that there are some smaller projects out there that potentially could do great things. But that's not my mindset. I'm an investor, so what I do is I only ever look at things that have already significant adoption. I don't really fish outside the top 10 and there's plenty of things in the top 10 that I really do not like at all and I won't touch. But there are some things in the top 10 cryptocurrencies that I will look at and I'm quite enthusiastic about. And now you might think, okay, well, you're leaving a lot of upside then, because they're already established. What are they going to do from here? Well, actually, I'd say we are so early in this adoption curve. We are so early that even if you go for the bedrock asset itself, Bitcoin, I believe that you will make such good returns from that alone that you simply don't need to start taking risks on other stuff. And if you do want to take risks on other stuff, make sure you know something. Make sure you have a degree of technical expertise that you can understand what problem they're trying to solve, and understand why they can do it better than others. I can't do that, and actually, I think that the vast majority of the people investing in them can't do that. I think they're gambling.
It is absolutely a gamble, but I think the key for me, and again, is to say you have to, as for any investment, it's all about your risk, your appetite for risk. So you would never have your full, effectively, investments exposed to that. I'm talking about like a discretionary, effectively your gambling pool. But one thing that kind of does it for me is that mindset is if you know it's a scam, then that's your first win, because that you can then start applying different investment rules to it, which is, okay, if it's a scam, it's got a very short shelf life. It will follow a very similar pattern where you'll see like social media campaigns. You'll see YouTube influencers starting talking about it, which means they've been paid in that kind of currency. You can actually, I could probably write something about this. There's almost a science behind it to follow that trajectory of like, when it's early, you get in. When you hear the influence talk about it, that's probably when you want to buy some or buy some more. But all you got to do is make sure you're out before the rug pull effectively comes into it. But again, it's just
I think if you get the
side.
right thing, you don't necessarily even need to do that. So I mean, if in the early days of the fallout from the 2000s, the .com crash, there was a handful of things that you could have invested on then that you could have just kept. The Amazons and the Googles. It's the challenges. It's recognizing those and sort of picking those. But if you focus purely on what value do they add and what problem are they solving, you could have identified the handful of stocks that these days are the blue chips of the market, because they're adding real value. Now some of these other coins that are out there. So Bitcoin, it's the store of value. I think that at a minimum, it's going to replace gold as an alternative store of value outside the financial system, but potentially it could replace the financial system itself as a store of value. And there's other things. So I mean, I can't give financial advice, and so this definitely isn't it. But what I say to friends and families is the projects in the top 10 that I quite like is Ethereum, which was the original smart contract one, and that has the most adoption. The most partners are working with them and building things on that network. It has the most developers, and it's getting lots of updates. So that for the moment is the Google of this whole space. There's Cardano, which took a number of people from the team of Ethereum, and they're developing something. I'm a little bit cool on that one because they've been promising a lot and not delivering a huge amount. So I have a little bit of it because if their promises hold up, that could be significant. It could be a rival to Ethereum. Although, like I say, I'm fairly cool on it. And the other one I really like is Solana. That's a very interesting one, because they what they are doing is they are offering the ability to transact at volume and speed. And to give you a sort of reference point on that, the real benchmark for financial services in terms of transactions is the Visa network, which can process something like 65,000 transactions per second. And Solana can do that. They can potentially exceed that in terms of transactions per second. Now, I don't know what the future holds. Will it be that Bitcoin is the store of value? I think that's the case. I think that is a relatively safe option. And then one of those smart chain options will sit on top of that and provide the smart contract ability, the financial services for everything else. Actually, I think it's more likely that what you'll have is, maybe Solana will run the stock exchange, and maybe Ethereum will handle all the other sort of smart contract needs when you're interacting with services like your utilities or buying a property or getting paid or something like that. But what you'll probably find is you'll have Bitcoin and a small number of other coins out there that provide technology, blockchain technology that really works. If you're risk adverse, stick to Bitcoin. And what I sort of tell friends and family is if you want to juice your returns by going for something which is potentially a little bit more risky, is do stick to those those established top coins that have sort of proven that people are adopting them and building stuff on them.
Yeah, because I think Cardano, I think Charles Hoskinson originally said that he wants to be the settlement layer for like APAC. So he's got a very specific target in mind. I think because when he said that, I thought that's a bit strange statement to make, but then it kind of made sense. He wasn't targeting the entire thing. He was just again targeting a specific region, a specific function. But I think you're right. Like Solana, for example, and there's a few others like Polkadot, for example, referred to as the third generation ecosystems effectively because that's what they are. It's not just a
Well, Polkadot is building on Ethereum the same way that Ethereum is building on Bitcoin. It is it is a sort of second layer to that. So for Polkadot to be successful, Ethereum has to be successful. But again, that is an established coin and it's gaining adoption, and that's one that I like. It's not one of my top holdings, but that is something I like as well.
Yeah, but again, I think it's important for people to know, like, when they're getting into this stuff, like, it is more when you say cryptocurrency, it appears like it's just a single use or a low function. But actually, when we're talking about these third generation stuff, as we said before, this is the replacement of the entire financial system happening right in front of our eyes, effectively. So, as you say, you can come at it from an investment perspective, or you can come at it from a preservation of value perspective, or even a freedom like perspective as well. As you said before, like there's no central control. So there are things like it's probably worthwhile spending some time on exchanges as well at some point. There are obviously like centralized exchanges that carry risk with them and things like that. So there are obviously things like that you can do with them. But fundamentally, when we talk about these ecosystems, it's the whole piece. It's the kind of this autonomous. I think there was I think DAO, wasn't it? Was it decentralized autonomous organization as a concept?
Oh,
yes. I think it was again, it came along with Ethereum, but the whole point was that you'd have an autonomous organization that just effectively executed rules automatically based on those conditions. So again, all these ecosystems that are growing up are kind of following that kind of theme. They're creating their own networks, then building on those networks to kind of solve all these problems in a completely decentralized way. And again, it's profound what the solutions are.
Is it worth talking about if anybody's listening to this and they're thinking that they do want to opt out of the system and they do want to get into this, and they do want to get hold of some of this, how they do it, that's probably worth covering. We've talked about some of the other coins, but what I say is, look, if you're going to invest in anything outside of Bitcoin, do your homework. You can go on YouTube and Google the names, YouTube or Google the names of these things and start learning, start reading. You shouldn't really be investing in anything you don't understand. And the same for Bitcoin. Do your research, get yourself up to speed on it. But if you want to get hold of it, it is quite easy these days. And what I always say to friends and family is, you can go to one of the big exchanges. I use Kraken myself because it's the biggest in Europe. I think the biggest in the US is Coinbase, and they make it relatively easy. You just go to it like a regular website. You provide some details about yourself. You provide your ID, and you can open an account with them. You then do a bank transfer to them. And you can buy directly on those platforms. And for the average user, you probably stop there because you can hold your coins on the platform and they take care of security for you. You don't have to think about it any further than that. But if you really want to opt out of the system, you can actually take ownership of those coins yourself by managing your own wallet. That's a little bit more advanced, and so if you haven't looked at this at all, don't go there yet. But when you do want to potentially go there, you look at a hardware wallet, something like a Trezor or something like a Ledger, and this is something that you can have at home, and you can transfer your coins to that, and at that point, you've taken complete possession. You are your own bank. no one else is holding those on your behalf. You completely eliminated the counterparty risk. And actually, if you really wanted to, there is one layer above that, which is you can simply memorize the private key in your head, and then you can cross borders with completely empty pockets, taking your wealth with you. But that's possibly a step too far for people who are coming into this new.
Give them 6 months.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you as well. Like my kind of descent into this was quite rapid. I think as soon as it clicked in my head about what it was and what the potential of the technology could do, I was hooked. I was like, right, sign me up. I'm gonna go heavy into this, and I actually ended up similar to Dogecoin. How it effectively just forked a copy of the Bitcoin. I did the same. I did the same for Litecoin, and then created.
Did you create your own coin?
I did. Not to sell. I wasn't scamming anybody. It was literally just for entertainment purposes. So I thought, you know what? In order to understand this, I'm going to figure out how it works. So I've kind of watched. I think it was just a series of 3 very basic YouTube videos, and I just managed to do it, and I got it up and running. But you know what was quite the funniest thing was when I got it up and running, somebody found the port and started mining it, and that just it was quite shocking. And then I realized that got me into the kind of mining aspect of it. It's like, well, hang on a minute, what have I just done? You effectively just created something.
I thought you were going to say that Elon Musk tweeted about it, and now
yeah. I had there's a few things I wanted to mention about the kind of price manipulation, and that was one of them. In terms of like, it's mainly a cautionary tale, to be honest, because the things, and again, it's a really important point for people to know, is it's completely unregulated. So whilst there are you can be taxed on crypto holdings and things like that, but there are no such protections. So usually, if something gets taxed, there's a flip side where you might get regulatory protection or some kind of insurance that does not exist in crypto at all.
Like I said, you are your own bank,
yeah,
and you take full responsibility for it. So if you take those coins, and I don't know, you send them to the wrong person, or somebody steals them, there is nobody that you can ring up and say, this happened, sort it out for me. That simply does not exist. So at the moment, if you have absolutely zero understanding of this, you need to get your understanding up before you do anything. But actually, I like that, because the flip side of having nobody to call is that nobody stands in your way. There is nobody who can decide that you shouldn't be doing that. So to give you an example, just from today, the Afghanistan thing really spooked me, and I'll explain why in a minute. But the Afghanistan thing spooked me, and I've been reallocating more money from my equity portfolio to my crypto portfolio. Dealing with the legacy financial system is so painful, because you've got to sell your stocks, then you've got to wait 3 days for that trade to settle. Then you've got to do a bank transfer from your broker to your bank account. That takes another day. Then you've got to go to your bank account, and you've got to transfer to the exchange that you're buying the crypto on. And what happened today is I did a transfer, which I've done multiple times, and the bank blocked it. And I then had to spend a little over an hour actually on the phone trying to get through to somebody to get that transaction cleared so that it could go through. And so the whole thing took best part of a week in order to get money from A to B.
Mm-hmm.
And with cryptocurrencies, you might wait half an hour if it's slow, and it's done. The speed is so significantly faster. So you become a hell of a lot more responsible for yourself. But the flip side is that things just move, things happen. Nobody stops you. Nobody says, no, you can't do that. You can't transfer this. You can't pay that person. You can't buy this. It's just total control in your own hands. And that's why it's so terrifying for governments in the financial sector.
No, but also there's an opportunity there to learn. And I think that's important, because as soon as you've got the responsibility, you've then got the responsibility to learn and protect, as you say, to protect yourself. But again, it's a lost art almost these days, isn't it? Because everything's kind of dumbed down and supplied for you and made simple. But actually, you're going the opposite way when you start going into crypto, because you have to learn about these things, as you say, to kind of protect yourself.
I think you are at the moment. So at the well, it's not even that now. So if you have no technical skill, I mean, you can still go to one of the exchanges. It's just a website, and you just sign up, and you just, you type in your name and your address and your details, and then you've got an account, and then you can buy and you can do it. So it's really not the basic level at this point is really quite easy. It's just going to a website. Is if you want to go that step further and be directly your own bank, that's harder. And actually, I think it will get easier. So in 10 years' time, I fully expect it to be, nothing more complicated to transact entirely in crypto than an app on your phone that your grandma will be able to use perfectly reasonably, and she may not even be aware that she's using crypto. All she's aware of is that a payment came in, went into this thing on her phone that she presses the button for, and then she can spend it, and she doesn't know how it works or why it works, but it just works. So it's going to get easier all the time, but that's the opportunity, because as it gets easier, more and more people come in. And I think we are right at the beginning of that mass adoption phase. So if you ever looked at those new technology adoption charts, and it says the innovators, and then the early adopters, and then the early mass market, we are right at the start of that early mass market phase at the moment. And when we come out the other side of this, we're going to be in the mass market, and that's when the potential for this really gets big. And that's why I think you don't need to go down onto this sort of gambling altcoin. There is more than enough opportunity in just the Bitcoin itself at this point, and it will get so much easier as we go forward.
No, and you can already see that with sites like PancakeSwap, for example, is a perfect example of that, because effectively they are offering that, still early, right? But they're offering you that kind of one-stop solution. It's fully decentralized. It it connects to your own wallet. Then you've got options, so you can buy, you can exchange, you can farm, you can loan, you can gamble. It's one-stop shop effectively. So I think it's an early version, but I think I agree with it. It is coming to the point where
I've never actually used that. I've only actually ever used the regular exchanges because I'm fairly vanilla on this. I mean, I just go for the main ones, the big established ones, and for me the big exchanges are appropriate. But it is comforting to know that even if the government had a complete breakdown tomorrow, if the financial system collapsed tomorrow and all the exchanges went offline, it's comforting to know that actually with a little bit of research, I can continue to transact, trade coins, move value around using the decentralized network. It's a little bit more work, and I'll probably have to watch one or two videos and read a help file before I can do it. But with the knowledge I've already got, it will be most an hour or two, and I'm doing everything that I did on centralized exchanges on a decentralized exchange.
Yeah, and if not more, and just going back to your point about if you're fresh into this using Coinbase, even Coinbase now are starting to offer, you lock away coins and you'll gain interest on the value, which in itself is again quite profound, right? Because these are
and the interest is significant, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, I mentioned earlier that back in the 80s you could get sort of an 8% on a standard high street bank account, and then that value has been stripped away by the financial sector year after year to the point where you now get no interest. You go and look at some of these cryptocurrency exchanges, and it's back at the 8%. And the reason it's that is because that is the natural interest rate for the economy. That's the natural rate. It's just been the vampire squids of the financial sector has sucked it all away so that you don't get it anymore. But you can get it in crypto now.
No, totally. And I think that's one of the main selling points. I mean, and that is just, like I say, even for the mainstream, because this is what kind of makes me positive about the whole situation is Coinbase are definitely mainstream, and they're offering something like 8%. So again, using that kind of risk profile approach, if you've got like a small amount that you're okay taking a high risk against, you can go to places like PancakeSwap, who are brand new. You can get hundreds of % on some of these things,
Yes.
and you're not tied into like 7 days or 30-day holding periods. You can literally, and I've done this. I was messing around basically trying to get my head around how this yield farming worked, and I was literally on a 650% APR rate for literally just pledging my coins. So basically, I had a quantity of coins. I locked them in a contract effectively. I could then yield the money that came out of that. I could just literally take it out and then go exchange it for dollars and GBP. It was like printing money. And obviously,
and it worked.
And it absolutely worked. Yeah. And again, when the crash, or when I thought that the big crash was coming, within about 15 minutes, I got everything out. Like I'd
Wow.
unbound the contracts and get effectively harvested all the yield from it, moved it to an exchange, changed it from into, I think I changed to Cardano actually because that's the cheapest and quickest to get it off, and then I got it back into GBP literally within less than half an hour.
So we're starting to run out of time now. We probably haven't got long left, but one of the things I think is probably worth touching upon is, what if this plays out, and I think it is going to play out. I think the network effects, the adoption is basically unstoppable at this point. So I gave the figure before that the internet was growing at 60% a year, and this is growing at 120% a year. All of the factors that go into that are continuing to exist. I mean, those are real. So the growth is real. This is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does this mean for things like taxation and government? Well, the obvious thing for taxation is if we go down a central bank digital currency, they own us. If we end up with a decentralized future, a Bitcoin-based future as the underlying store of value, it becomes incredibly difficult for any central power to tax us.
Yep.
And what they are effectively going to have to do, if you play out the logic of this, is they can only tax us for things that we agree to. So we will only purchase the services from government that provide value to us.
Yep.
That is a fundamental shift, because at the moment what they do is they extract as much money as they can coercively through the tax system. They create as much money as they can through the financial system, and now the direct printing of money. And they decide how much they spend and what they spend it on. And it could be any sort of noble cause, from importing fighting age men from North Africa, which is very laudable, and putting them up in hotels, or it could be providing jobs for people to become advisors on all the important things like trans dance routines, or whatever it is that the high paid civil service jobs are today.
Yep.
But they're able, the government are able to always spend more money than they get in through the system that we currently have. If we move to a decentralized finance system, they can't extract money from us that we don't want to give them.
Yep.
So they have to provide value, and that is such a fundamental shift that you can see why the people of Davos are absolutely terrified of what's coming down the road. Which is why it is difficult not to get a little bit conspiratorial. When you think about, they've known this. This was obvious to everybody in finance and anybody in government who understood finance, that we were going to get to the end of the road.
Mm-hmm.
If not in 2008, then the next time we had a crash. So the existing system is going away, and they've got to ask themselves at this point, the natural route from here, it's either going to be a gold-based financial system, although that doesn't, that would have been the case back in 2008. They would have had no choice but to go to a gold-based system, whereas now it is a choice between a gold-based system or a cryptocurrency-based system. And because of the advantages in terms of speed and efficiency that cryptocurrency advantages, it's probably going to outcompete anything else. So they can see, that next time there's a big crash, we're going to end up probably adopting Bitcoin as the global standard, and unless they can be the ones who engineer how that crash happens, when it happens, and what the narrative is at the time when it happens, and what they can offer us up in exchange. So I think we really are at a precipice at the point.
I would agree. And do you think they've rushed, or do you think they've been squeezed for time? Which is why, even though they've done a bloody brilliant job, if it is a conspiracy, they've actually done quite a good job. But there's still a lot of stuff I don't think they've had control over, which is kind of telling, because so many people are talking about this. Do you know what I mean? Which basically means we've sussed them out. So have a lot of other people. So do you think there's an element of they've been rushed into this a little bit, or it's happening quicker than they would have liked?
So I know there are people out there who say that it was all planned from the start. I'm inclined to say that it probably wasn't, because if it was, their plans would have been better laid than they are at the moment. I think they saw an opportunity, And I think actually a lot of what we've experienced over the last 16 months is actually a genuine mass psychosis. It is a mass hysteria that has fed on itself, and that is a function of the type of news system that we have, the type of social media that we have. But all the same is that I think they had plans that they were working on for a great reset. Whether they called it that, they probably did call it that amongst themselves. And they saw this and they thought, right, grab that project off the shelf. We're bringing it forward a few years. But it doesn't feel like they've got all their ducks in a row. So China has. So China already had their national digital ID, their social credit system. They'd already been working on their digital wallets held at the central bank, so their central bank digital wallets. And all they needed to do is this opportunity. Well, in fact, they didn't even need this opportunity because they're authoritarian. They basically just rolled it out when they were ready to go. And I think the Western governments were caught off on it. So I do believe they have used this crisis, and I do think they've exaggerated this crisis for their own purposes. But I do think they're not quite ready yet, because if they were ready, I would have expected to have seen certain things happen already at this point that haven't happened. So I do think we're in this window of opportunity, and it's probably only going to last a few years at most, where this could genuinely go either way. And the two routes are a decentralized future where the power resides in the citizen and they only take from government what they want. So, I'm only going to provide taxes on the basis that you provide something that genuinely adds value to me. Or we go down that other route, which is they control all economic value and we essentially become serfs. We go down the Chinese model, which is they can control every aspect of every economic transaction, which is basically our lives. And I think it's quite clear when you look at, just look at the tweets coming out of the World Economic Forum. They know which future they want, and they try and sell it to us in a way that makes it sound like nice. You won't own a thing, but it's okay because you'll be happy. You won't have to think. You won't have to own anything. You won't have to make any decisions. You won't have any privacy. But we guide you. We guide you from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep. You won't have to make any decisions or take any responsibility for yourself. It will be brilliant. So they try and sell it in a way that's as attractive as it can be. But for those of us who are awake, it's an absolute horror show.
It's hell. Yep.
But I don't think that the die is set either way. I think that the next 3 years are going to determine the next 100 years in terms of what our societies look like. And it genuinely could go either way at this point.
No, I'd agree. I share pretty much everything you said there. I think I'm optimistic ultimately, but I agree that it feels like a fork in the road, doesn't it? So I think, you've got a choice, which is why, again, this stream is really important to kind of lay out that argument for the decentralized choice, because the other one is really not palatable.
I will just mention, I've talked about them before, but I talked about Real Vision, which is basically a sort of a YouTube for the financial sector. And the guy that runs that, he actually has a fairly optimistic future, which he lays out, which, I mentioned because, if it actually turned out this way, I'd be very happy. And what he says is that the growth of Bitcoin and the growth of interest in it and the network effects and things like what we're doing now, this podcast and telling friends and family about it, that is the solution. Because what will happen is people will, of their own volition, see that what's going on in crypto and Bitcoin is more interesting, and they will naturally start to move. They will trickle across, and it will be a continuous daily process of people trickling across from the old system to the new system. And that a couple of years down the line, there will be so many people already on the new system that at that point they can afford to let the existing system collapse because the effects won't be so disruptive. That's a very sort of white-pilled way of looking at it. I think that the people who are rich and powerful under the existing system might not want to do that. But then if they saw that was inevitable, what would happen is they would just start buying up into this new system. The people who are already rich would stay rich, which is a slightly bitter pill to swallow when you consider that, you know, they've got that way by essentially rent seeking under the existing financial system. But if that's a price we have to pay in order to have a peaceful transition from the old system to the new system, it is a bitter pill, but it's worth paying.
No, I agree totally. And I think, just again from a human perspective, if you were in that situation, it's just natural that you would want to do the same, right? So if you built up whatever way you'd built up wealth now, whatever your involvement was and how you'd done it, you'd be looking to protect your own value. Do you know what I mean? So it's down to human nature, isn't it? So again, you can't blame them. But I agree with you. If that's the price, then
and look, the people who spent a lifetime working and they want to transition over, and they're preserving value, then I have absolutely no problem with that. That's absolutely brilliant. That's how it should be. The ones I have the difficulty with is the financial institutions who have been sat right next to the money printer for 50 years and have only got to where they are because they've been taking first call on this new money as it is created, and they've grown rich. You know, if they transition over rich to the new system, it's going to be unpalatable in my opinion. But if it's what we need to do to effectively avoid a multi-decade Great Depression or a civil war, then so be it. That will have to be what it is. So I mean, you know, one example, and he's not so bad actually, because he did actually create value. But Bill Gates is emphatically opposed against cryptocurrencies. He hates them. He's on record knocking them a number of times. You know, he knocked them when they were $1. He knocked them now that it's, you know, $40,000 for Bitcoin. He can wait until each Bitcoin is $10 million, and he can still buy all the Bitcoin that he wants. So, you know, somebody like him is going to remain rich no matter what happens. It's just the way it's going to be. But, you know, potentially we do have a way to get out of this boom bust paper money system that just enriches the financial sector and government constantly.
And I think as well, they might be able to transfer the value across, but again, the decentralized solutions, it doesn't give them the control. So again, it's a bit of a white pill, isn't it? It's like, okay, fine, you've kept your value, but you know what? You're not going to be able to control like you wanted to do. With
their ability to extract from the system from that point forward, is severely denuded.
No, I mean that again, stark choice, but the choice is clear. So I think, to be honest, that is a great place to wrap it up.
It's been a fascinating chat, and I just hope that this helps people. I think actually, you know, this stream we've covered so much that this is probably going to be the place that in future I point, you know, friends and family and you know, colleagues and people that I worked with in the past. I'm going to be pointing them to this stream and saying, you know, this is the ideal place to get an entry level understanding as to what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, no, totally agree. So, and thanks for your time. I know we'll obviously keep in touch as well on Twitter. But if anyone else comes across this and listens and wants to do more detailed follow-ups and things like that, please feel free to get in touch, and we can organize it. Great. Well, thanks for your time, Dan. Again, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks for all your wisdom and insights. And we'll do it again soon.
Enjoyed it immensely. Thanks so much.
Cool. Cheers, everyone. Bye.